For 17 years, the United States government told his family that General Rupert Dade was no longer home. That's the line I keep coming back to when I think about what happened at Creston Medical Center on a Tuesday in February. Not the scar behind his ear. Not the laminated card in a nurse's breast pocket. Not the thing that broke 17 years of silence in 6 minutes on a gray Portland morning. The line that stays with me is simpler than all of that. They told his family he wasn't there, and a woman in blue scrubs looked at him and knew they were wrong. Before I go further, I want to ask you something small. If you're listening to this from anywhere, Portland, Baton Rouge, Birmingham, wherever your Tuesday is taking you, drop a comment and tell me where you are. And if this story gets to you, tap that like button and subscribe to Hidden Badges Stories. It takes 5 seconds and it means more than you know now. Let's begin. Dr. Lawrence Beckett arrived at Creston Medical Center at 7:40 every morning and left at precisely 5 every afternoon. Between those hours, he ran the neurology department the way a man runs a tight ship. Efficiently, without sentiment, and without deviation from what the literature had already decided was true. His office on the 4th floor faced the parking garage. He had declined the window facing the park. Views, in his experience, encouraged the wrong kind of thinking. He was a tall man, 61, with a narrow face and close-cropped gray hair, and the particular kind of posture that comes from decades of being correct. The plaque outside his door read Chief of Neurology, Creston Medical Center. Below it, in smaller letters, Adjunct Professor, OHCU School of Medicine. Both things were true. Both things mattered to him in roughly equal measure. Maren Ashby had worked at Creston for 7 years and had spoken to Dr. Beckett exactly 4 times. 3 of those conversations had been initiated by him, and in all 3, he had been looking at something else. She was 39 years old, 5'4", with dark auburn hair pulled into a low braid that she retied twice a shift. Her scrubs were a particular shade of blue. Not the standard hospital-issue teal, but a brighter, cleaner color she ordered herself because she had decided long ago that if she was going to disappear into the background, she would at least do it in a color she liked. A small enamel pin sat above her ID badge. A brown sparrow on a white field, wings folded. Nobody on the floor had ever asked what it meant. Her right hand had a scar along the thenar muscle, thin and pale, the kind of scar that comes from shrapnel moving fast through a confined space. She wore a black silicone wristband on the same wrist. Nurses sometimes had those. Nobody looked twice. By 8:15 that Tuesday morning, she had already restarted 2 IV lines the overnight team had let run dry, calmed a stroke patient's husband in the waiting area, and filed a quiet complaint about a medication discrepancy in Bay 2. She did not do these things because anyone asked her to. She did them because they needed doing and she was there. At 8:22, the charge nurse told her Bay 7 had a new intake, VA referral, family case. Dr. Beckett hadn't decided yet whether he'd see it. She walked down. Through the glass panel, she saw 3 people. A woman in her early 40s, dark-haired, wearing a green jacket that had been gripped and re-gripped until the lapels went soft. A younger man in his mid-30s, standing near the window with the particular stillness of someone trained to stand that way. He wore a regular sweatshirt, but his spine was marine. She could see it from the hallway. And in the wheelchair between them, a man. He was broad through the shoulders, the way men are broad when they have spent a long time being strong. Now those shoulders curved slightly inward, the way they do after years of a chair. He was dressed in a pressed blue shirt and dark trousers. His hair was white. His hands lay open on his thighs, palms up. His eyes were open. They were not the eyes of a man who wasn't there. They were pale gray, and when Maren pushed the door open and stepped inside, they moved to her. Slowly, deliberately, with the particular quality of movement that belongs to someone who is watching and processing and waiting to be understood. She did not let anything show on her face. Her training would not let her. "Good morning, I'm Maren Ashby. I'll be your intake nurse." The woman in the green jacket stood up fast. Her name was Sophie Dade. The man by the window was her brother Ben. The man in the wheelchair was their father. "General Rupert Dade," Sophie said, United States Air Force, retired. Maren did not react. She crossed the room, set the clipboard on the counter, reached for the blood pressure cuff. As she wrapped it around his arm, he did not flinch. His eyes tracked from her face to the cuff and back to her face. 138/86, pulse 64, cool, dry skin. She worked quietly while Sophie talked. They had been to Johns Hopkins in Mayo and a rehabilitation center in Switzerland and 2 neurologists at OHSU. The diagnosis at every stop had been the same. Severe traumatic brain injury from an IED blast in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, November 2007. Persistent vegetative state, complicated by secondary brainstem injury. Complete absence of voluntary cognition and communication. 17 years of the same answer from some of the best doctors in the world. "We know what they say," Sophie said. "We've heard it 11 times. But last month our cousin sent us something. An article. About a program that studied blast injury recovery. We read that Dr. Beckett had published research on residual consciousness in severe TBI patients. We requested an appointment. They put us on a 6-month wait list. We waited. Maren looked at the file. She did not open it. She looked at Rupert Dade. She moved carefully. She lifted the collar of his blue shirt at the left side of his neck, angling toward the area just behind and below his left ear. She was looking for something she had not thought about in 6 years. Something she had, in her more honest moments, been half hoping she would never have to think about again, because thinking about it meant thinking about what had been done with it. Or rather, what hadn't. She found it. A thin, pale scar, slightly curved, running about an inch behind the tragus of his left ear, old, clean. Not the scar of a civilian surgery. The angle was wrong for that. The depth of the old incision line, even faded to almost nothing after 17 years, belonged to a field approach to the mastoid region. Fast, precise, done under conditions where there was no time to be careful, and every reason to be exact. She had made that incision herself. Not on this man, on others. In a building at Fort Detrick that did not appear on any floor plan she had ever been allowed to photograph. She set the collar back. "General Dade," she said quietly, "I'm going to check your reflexes. Is that all right?" His eyes moved to her. And something in the steadiness of that movement made her reach into the left breast pocket of her scrubs and take out a small laminated card, 4 inches by 3. On it was a grid of 9 symbols arranged in a 3x3 pattern. She had carried it in that pocket for 7 years. She had never shown it to a patient. Until now. She held it in her right hand, the scarred one, where he could see it without moving his head. She said, "General, I am going to place my hand palm up under your right hand. If you understand what I am saying to you, I would like you to tap my palm 3 times. Sophie made a small sound. Ben came away from the wall. Maren placed her open palm under Rupert Dade's right hand, light and steady. She waited. 1 second, 2. 3 taps, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Sophie's hand went to her mouth. Ben Dade, who had done 2 tours with the 2nd Marine Division and had not cried at his mother's funeral 4 years earlier because his father had needed him to hold on, sat down on the exam stool and put his face in his hands. Maren did not move. Her palm was still under Rupert's hand. She said, "General, if you have been able to hear and understand everything said to you for the past 17 years, tap 3 times. A pause. 3 taps. The room was completely silent except for the fluorescent hum overhead and Ben Dade trying very hard not to make a sound. The glass door opened. Dr. Beckett walked in with the chart in one hand and his reading glasses in the other, already moving at the brisk pace of a man who had decided what he was going to say. "Mr. Dade," he said without looking up, "I have reviewed your father's case file. The diagnosis is entirely consistent across." Dr. Maren's voice was level. "May I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" He looked up. He registered her, the blue scrubs, the braid, the clipboard. He recognized her the way he recognized all floor nurses, as furniture that occasionally spoke. "This is not the time, Ashby." "I think it is, doctor." Something in the flatness of her voice, not volume, not heat, just a particular quality that did not ask permission, stopped him. In the hallway, she told him about the scar. She told him what it was. "A mastoid-adjacent temporal decompression approach," she said, "used by Army Special Operations medical units between 2004 and 2012 for acute intracranial pressure management in blast injury casualties. The procedure placed a micro-bore pressure valve through the temporal bone. In a subset of patients, the valve's secondary electromagnetic effect interfered with standard vegetative state assessment. Patients presented as cognitively absent on conventional testing while remaining fully conscious internally. The program that studied this outcome was based at Fort Detrick. It was defunded in 2019. The findings were filed and partially declassified in 2021. Beckett stared at her. "Where did you learn this?" Maren looked at him. Dr. General Dade responded to a 3-tap consciousness protocol just now, in front of his children. "I am asking you, before this family leaves, to order a functional MRI with the amplification parameters in the Fort Detrick 2021 appendix, a quantitative EEG, and a formal evaluation under the Modified Disorders of Consciousness Assessment tool." Beckett's face was the face of a man standing on ground that had just told him it was not ground. "You are a floor nurse, Ms. Ashby." "Yes, doctor." "You don't diagnose, you don't prescribe testing." "I know what I saw, and I know what that scar means. I am asking you to look at it before you make a decision." He opened his mouth, he closed it. He looked through the glass panel of Bay 7, where Sophie had both hands pressed flat to her father's arm, and Ben was still on the stool, and Rupert Dade's pale gray eyes were watching the door. Then Beckett walked back inside. He looked at the scar. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Then he walked back out into the hallway. "What is that card?" he said, the grid. She handed it to him. He studied it. "This isn't in any published literature." "No, it was developed for field use with non-communicative blast injury casualties. The program that created it was classified until 2021. I was authorized to retain this copy at separation." Beckett's jaw worked. "Who were you?" She looked at him steadily. "Captain Maren Ashby, Army Special Operations Medical Research Unit, Fort Detrick, call sign Sparrow, retired. Now you're intake nurse for Bay 7. The silence in the hallway lasted 4 full seconds. Then Dr. Beckett said, "I want a functional MRI, stat, and I want Dr. Osei from the Consciousness Disorders Clinic on the phone in the next 20 minutes. "Yes, doctor." "And Ashby," he paused, "don't go anywhere." She didn't. By noon, Dr. Abina Osei from the Consciousness Disorders Clinic had reviewed the fMRI results herself, standing in the radiology reading room with her arms crossed and her face doing the thing faces do when the floor moves. The imaging showed clear, organized cortical response to language stimuli, not the scattered ambient noise of a vegetative brain, structured, purposeful, the brain of a man listening to the person in front of him and formulating a response. "He's been in there the whole time," Dr. Osei said. "Yes," Maren said. 17 years. "Yes." Osei looked at the scan for a long moment, then she looked at Maren. "How did you know where to look?" "I knew the scar," Maren said. By 2 o'clock, the meeting in the conference room included Beckett, Osei, the hospital's chief medical officer, a VA representative, and Maren. The question of how a floor nurse had known what 11 doctors across 4 countries had missed was asked 3 times in 3 different ways. She answered it the same way each time. When the VA representative suggested transferring General Dade immediately, Sophie Dade, who had been sitting very quietly for 22 minutes, said no, clearly, calmly, with the finality of a woman who had spent 17 years agreeing to things she did not want to agree to. Ben said no from the back of the room. He was quieter about it, no less final. Creston assumed clinical responsibility. By 4 o'clock, Maren was in a small cleared office on the 2nd floor. A desk, a phone, a window facing west, late afternoon light on the Willamette. She didn't need more. She called a number she had memorized in 2019. 6 rings, generic voicemail, 7 years was a long time. She called a second number. Staff Sergeant Brienne Lusk, now Dr. Brienne Lusk, Neurology Fellowship, UCSF, picked up on the second ring. "Maren." "Bree, I found one." A pause long enough to count. "Tell me." "Rupert Dade, Air Force General, Kandahar, 2007. He has the scar," he responded to the grid. "Imaging confirms full cortical activity." "Oh my God." "I need the outcome files, Bree. The ones from our cohort. I need to know how many others." "I have them," Brienne said. "I kept copies. From our unit, 23 soldiers were documented with the temporal valve procedure in the field. 11 died from their injuries. Of the remaining 12, she paused, and Maren heard a drawer open. 8 were transferred to long-term care between 2008 and 2014. All 8 were diagnosed as vegetative. None of them have been evaluated under the modified protocol. None of their families were told the protocol existed. Maren picked up a pen. 8, she said, plus Dade makes 9. She wrote 9 names on the yellow legal pad. She underlined it. "Can you come to Portland?" "I'll be there Thursday morning." Maren hung up. She looked at the river. Then she picked up the phone again and began making calls. The first outside call came at 5:47. A woman in Spokane named Patricia Ewan. Her husband, Master Sergeant David Ewan, had been in a care facility in eastern Washington for 14 years. He had a small scar behind his left ear. His doctors had told her it was from a field surgical drain. She had seen something on her phone about a Portland hospital and a general and a nurse, and she just needed to know. Mrs. Ewan's voice was steady. "Yes, someone can help. My name is Maren Ashby. I need you to write down an address." The communication sessions with Rupert Dade began the following morning. Maren and Dr. Osei worked slowly. They used the modified tap grid alongside functional imaging. They let him set the pace. He could tap a full sentence in 7 minutes when he was not tired. He tired easily after 17 years of near-complete stillness. They did not push. The first full sentence he communicated, on the morning of the 2nd day, was addressed to his daughter. Sophie was beside him when it came through, Maren reading the tap pattern aloud. "I heard every word you said, every visit, all of it. I was here." Sophie did not make a sound. She put her forehead down on the bed rail beside his hand and stayed there. Rupert's fingers moved in the small way that was all he had right now, until his fingertips touched her hair. Ben was in the doorway. He held the doorframe with both hands, and his shoulders shook once, and then he was still, and then he came in and sat down. The second sentence came the following afternoon. It was addressed to Maren. It read, Sparrow. She looked up from the grid. His pale gray eyes were on her. She had not told anyone her call sign. She had not used it since 2019. She had not told Rupert Dade who she had been before she became a nurse in blue scrubs in a Portland hospital. He read her expression. He tapped again. I knew, 2009, Fort Detrick. Program 3, you briefed my unit. She had. She had been 26 and Captain Ashby, and she had stood in front of a room full of Air Force crews and briefed them on emergency response to non-communicative blast casualties. She had not known any of their names. She looked at him. She said, yes, sir, that was me. He tapped. Took you long enough, Captain. She did not laugh. She was not a person who laughed easily, and she was not going to start now in a hospital room in front of a general she had just pulled out of 17 years of silence. But something in her face moved, just slightly. She said, I know, sir, I'm sorry it took so long. He tapped once, slow, certain, not your fault. She looked at the grid. She looked at him. She said no, it wasn't. By the end of the first week, 2 more veterans had arrived at Creston from Spokane and Medford. By the end of the second, 5 more were in the evaluation pipeline from VA facilities across 3 states. Brienne Lusk had arrived Thursday as promised and had not left. Dr. Ossie had cleared her schedule twice. The Portland Tribune ran the story on day 6. National pickup started on day 8. By day 12, Creston's main switchboard had received over 400 calls from families asking about husbands, fathers, sons, men who had come home from Iraq and Afghanistan and been placed in rooms and diagnosed and filed away. Not all of them had the scar, but some did. Some of those who had the scar were too far gone. The valve had degraded. The years had done what years do to tissue that is not moving. Maren met with each of those families herself. She did not mislead them. She told them what was possible and what was not, and what they could give their person that they had not known they could give. One of the veterans who could not be reached in time was a man named Gerald Portis, a former Army Ranger who had been in a facility in Memphis for 15 years. He died of pneumonia in late March, 6 weeks after his family had called Creston. His daughter wrote Maren a letter that arrived on a Monday morning. He passed quietly, the letter said, but the night before, after your doctor visited and explained what had been there all along, his hand moved to my hand and stayed there for 4 hours. I don't know if that was him or just reflex, but I know it felt like him. Thank you for making sure he was seen before it was over. Maren kept the letter in the top drawer of her desk. The formal program review took place 7 weeks after the first session with Rupert Dade. 2 DOD representatives, the Creston CMO, Dr. Ossie, Brienne, and Maren. The DOD wanted oversight. They used words like protocol standardization and chain of command and proper channels. Maren let them finish. Then she said, the men on this list were left in those rooms because the proper channels decided the program wasn't worth the funding. I would like you to tell me why the proper channels should now be trusted to reach them faster than I can from this office. There was a long silence. The CMO said, what does Creston need to keep this program here? Legal cover, Maren said, DOD cooperation on file access, 3 additional nurses military experience preferred, 1 physiatrist, transportation support for non-ambulatory veterans who cannot fly commercial. Done, the CMO said. The senior DoD representative opened a folder. Captain Ashby, the Department of the Army, and the Department of the Air Force have jointly prepared a formal request for your reinstatement at the grade of Lieutenant Colonel, to serve as director of. She let him finish. Then she said, I'm going to decline. He blinked. I left the Army for a reason, she said. These men were left in those rooms by a system that prioritized budget over them. I am not going to be the person who helps that system look like it fixed itself. I will work with the DD. I will share every file, every outcome, every protocol we develop here. But I will do it as a nurse, from this hospital, in these scrubs. She touched the sparrow pin above her badge. The DoD representative looked at the pin. He looked at her. He closed the folder. He said, understood. 3 months after the Tuesday morning in February, when Maren Ashby pushed open the door of Bay 7 and saw a man's eyes move and knew he was still there, Creston Medical Center held a small gathering in its main conference room. Not a press event, those had already happened. This was internal. Staff, families, and the 9 veterans who had been reached in time. Of those 9, 6 had progressed to full tap-grid communication. 2 were in early-stage sessions. 1, David Yoon from Spokane, had surprised everyone in week 4 by recovering partial vocalization, a side effect of the stimulation protocol that no one had specifically anticipated, and that Brienne had immediately begun documenting for publication. His first vocalized word, spoken in a therapy session with Patricia present, was her name. Patricia told Maren about it in the hallway afterward. She was a composed woman, tall, with iron-gray hair, and the particular steadiness of someone who has managed 14 years of what no one prepares you to manage. She didn't cry telling it. She just took Maren's hand in both of hers and held it for a long moment without speaking. At the gathering, Rupert Dade was in his wheelchair at the front of the room. A communication board sat on the tray attached to his chair, a larger version of the laminated grid, and an amplification device Brienne had sourced that translated his tap patterns into synthesized speech. They had calibrated it to a pitch close to how Sophie remembered his voice. When he addressed the room, it was the synthesized voice that spoke, but the words were his, tapped out one careful pattern at a time. I was a general. I gave orders to 10,000 people. I flew missions over 3 countries. I thought I understood what strength was. Then I sat in a room for 17 years and could not tell my daughter I loved her, and I learned what strength actually costs. I am here because one person looked at me and looked past what she had been told to see. She did not ask the system for permission. She looked at me and she saw me. That is the whole story. Everything else is paperwork. The room was quiet for a moment after the synthesized voice finished. Then Sophie started to clap, then Ben, then everyone. Afterward, Rupert's chair was brought to where Maren was standing near the back wall. He looked at her and tapped the grid. They want to put your name on a plaque. She said, I heard. He tapped. What did you say? She said, I said the plaque should have all 9 names on it, and yours. He looked at her for a long moment. He tapped, stubborn. She said, yes, sir. He tapped, good. Ben came up behind the chair. He was in dress blues, had arrived that way without being asked. He looked at Maren. He brought his right hand slowly to his brow. She returned it. He nodded once and stepped back. Sophie put her arms around Maren before she could step away. 5 full seconds. Maren held her back. When Sophie pulled away, her voice was steady even though her eyes were not. She said, my father told me last week, through the board, that he used to sing me to sleep when I was 3 years old. A song I don't remember. He described it note by note through a tap grid. I still don't know how to. She took a breath. You don't owe me anything, Maren said. He did the work, you did the work, Ben did the work, I just knew where to look. Sophie said, you looked when 11 other doctors didn't. Maren said, yes. Sophie said, that is everything. She walked back to her father. Ben was already there, one hand on the back of the wheelchair. Sophie's hand found Rupert's shoulder. Rupert's finger moved on the board. The synthesized voice said, quietly enough that only the 3 of them could hear, take me home. Maren watched them leave. Brienne appeared at her elbow with 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one over without asking how Maren took it. She already knew. The 2 women stood there for a moment, looking at the room, at the families, the veterans, the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, the VA coordinator, who had turned out to be quietly on their side once the paperwork cleared. Brienne said, there are 4 more names, families I haven't located yet. I know, Maren said. I'll keep looking. So will I. Brienne looked at her, and there was something in that look, all the years of it, a basement room that officially did not exist, a program they had both believed in and both lost and both quietly carried in their pockets in the form of a card that nobody ever asked about. Brienne said, you could have been a lieutenant colonel. Maren took a sip of the coffee. It was the right temperature. I know, she said. Then she set the cup down, touched the sparrow pin above her badge, and walked back out into the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they always had. The antiseptic smell was the same. Creston Medical Center on a gray Portland afternoon, ordinary and necessary and full of glass-walled rooms where people brought the people they loved in final acts of hope. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor. She walked past the nurse's station, past Bay 3 where she had corrected a misrun IV at 7 that morning, down toward the end of the hall. Bay 7 had a new patient. Through the glass, a man in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, completely still, his eyes were open. A woman sat beside him gripping the bed rail with both hands, talking to him, talking the way people talk when they are terrified no one is listening. Maren paused at the door. She looked at the man's eyes. She breathed in. She pushed the door open. Good morning, I'm Maren Ashby. I'll be your nurse today.